Well, my good morning as well to everyone. It's good to see so many here, as well as those who are joining us live and those who will be joining us later on. Of course, last week we started our youth sermon series, and we're beginning this with a 6-part series going through Psalm 23. And so last week we started off with verse 1, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And today we go on to verse 2. He makes me lie down in green pastures, and he leads me beside still waters. Now, for us to understand what David is saying in these verses, both about God as a shepherd and us as the sheep, there's some things that would have been very familiar to David as a shepherd, and as well as to the original audience that would have read this, that would have known being familiar with shepherds and sheep, that would help us to understand exactly what David is saying here. Now, the first thing that we hear when he says, "He makes me to lie down." Now, as we get older, we have to be convinced less and less to lie down. And the idea of being able to sleep almost any time sounds pretty good. But when we're younger, we usually want our bedtime to be as late as possible. And we get frustrated when we're told we have to lay down. And so our parents have to make us to go to bed even though we think it's so early because they know we have to get enough sleep. Well, in the same way, sheep actually have to be convinced and have to be put in the right position that they're going to be willing to sleep. And a good shepherd knows that this is something that he must manage. And in particular, there are a few things that if a sheep is experiencing one of these things, that the sheep will be unwilling to lay down. And so the way a shepherd makes a sheep lie down is by eliminating these things that would stop him from resting. Now, the first thing that would stop a sheep from resting is fear. Now, sheep are very timid animals, and there's not much they can do to protect themselves. And so when a sheep feels that there's some kind of threat or predator around and nothing to protect themselves, then they get restless and they run around and unfortunately actually do things that make them even more vulnerable. So what a shepherd must do is not only keep that sheep safe, but also must give it a feeling of safety. Because one of the most important things is that even if there isn't a predator around, that the sheep will feel, well, the shepherd is there to protect me so that it doesn't have to worry about maybe a predator coming up while it's sleeping. One time when I was camping with one of my friends, Kevin, and we were going on just a one-night backpacking trip, and it was summer, and so we normally wouldn't take any tents, and so we would just find a clearing and just lay out our sleeping bags and just go to sleep. And I was never that good of a sleeper, and Kevin's usually a little bit heavier sleeper, and so as we're camping late in the night, as you do when you're in the middle of the woods, you start to hear noises. And we heard something pretty loud, pretty close to us, and still don't know what it was. If it was a bear, or just a deer, who knows? But something that was pretty loud. And it's dark out, and you're in the woods, and so you don't know what it is. And so immediately you start to think about what it could be, and you start to get a little bit nervous. And I'm thinking, boy, Kevin's lucky because he's sleeping through this. Well, the next morning I woke up and I mentioned to Kevin that I'd heard something, and I said, "But you seem like you were sleeping just fine." And Kevin goes, "Oh, I heard it, but I wasn't worried about it." And so I thought, "Oh, why is that?" I'm thinking, well, he probably thought I was going to do something to stop the animal. And he goes, "Well, it was on your side, so if it had come, I was pretty sure it would have attacked you first, and then I would have had a chance to get away." So just the fact that I was in the way gave Kevin a sense of safety that allowed him to be able to rest. Well, a good shepherd would be willing to put himself between the sheep and the danger, which would mean that a sheep could feel safe to know that this shepherd is brave enough and is strong enough to do something to protect me. And so that's one thing a shepherd would do, would be to give the sheep a sense of protection with his presence. Now, sheep are also very social animals, and sheep is not uncommon. You'll have bigger sheep and smaller sheep, and the bigger sheep will often try to get their way, and they'll try to push the smaller sheep around, and this can create restlessness. And if you have a few bigger sheep who are kind of bullies, then that will stop the flock as a whole from resting. I'll go to a verse that's a good picture of this in Ezekiel 34. And Ezekiel 34, we have here a very good picture of exactly this sort of dynamic. In Ezekiel 34, beginning in verse 15, we read, "I myself will feed my sheep, and I myself will make them lay down, declares the sovereign Lord. I will seek the lost and bring back the strays. I will bandage the injured and strengthen the sick. But the fat and strong I will destroy. In the picture there, the fat and strong are those that would bully the other smaller, weaker sheep. I will feed them with judgment. As for you, my sheep, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am about to judge between one sheep and another, between ram and goats. Is it not enough for you to feed on the good pasture, that you must trample the rest of your pastures with your feet? This was something else that kind of larger sheep would do. Unfortunately, they would not only eat their portion, they'd go and they'd ruin the portion for other sheep. When you drink clean water, must you muddy the rest of the water by trampling it with your feet? As for my sheep, they must eat what you trampled with your feet and drink what you have muddied with your feet. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says to them. Look, I myself will judge between the fat sheep and the lean sheep, because you push with your side and your shoulder, and you thrust your horns at all the weak sheep until you scatter them. I will save my sheep, and they will no longer be prey. I will judge between one sheep and another. And so the picture there is of God providing order within the flock, that the stronger sheep would no longer bully the weaker sheep. Well, that's something that a shepherd must do, because otherwise, if the shepherd just allows the stronger sheep to take advantage of the weaker ones, then there will be no rest and the sheep will not lay down. Well, the last thing they must do is they must find food, because sheep eat and drink a lot, and if a sheep is hungry, then it's not going to lay down because it wants to find food, and you guys may be the same way I am. I don't want to go to sleep if I'm hungry. Now, we think about in this idea of making a lie down in green pastures, we imagine like what we see out here. We see just these lush, these green, these hills, and so many fields. But the interesting thing is that sheep don't tend to do well in lush and green environments, because they're very susceptible to pests and to insects. And so it's actually in a drier environment that they tend to do well, like Israel. But the problem is, in Israel, you don't find a lot of green pastures. And so when we think of green pastures, it's not necessarily the big green hills that we see. This would be an example of a green pasture in Israel. It's just a small little stretch. And so a shepherd must be very vigilant, must be guiding his sheep through this dry land to find a spot that they can feed on. And this takes a lot of effort, and this takes a lot of awareness. And if the shepherd is not working very hard to find these spots that they can graze, then the sheep will be hungry, and they're not going to eat, and they're not going to rest. So when David says he will make me lie down, he's saying he will give me a sense of protection. He will make sure that the stronger cannot bully the weak, and he will make sure that he guides me into a place that I can be sustained. And he also says he leads me beside quiet waters or still waters. And the picture there is of the type of water the sheep like to drink from, because we think about, clean water normally being these fast-flowing rivers, but sheep do not like to drink from fast-moving water. They like to drink from very still water, but the problem is often still water is something like this. There's nothing moving through, so it gets polluted. And this is actually a current-day picture from Israel of a polluted lake. But sheep will drink from whatever they find. And so if a shepherd does not lead his sheep to clean but quiet waters, the sheep will go find this and will drink up these pollutants. But instead, a shepherd must find something like this, still water, even in a dry land, but that's healthy to drink. So when David says as well, he leads me beside quiet waters, he says he leads me into the kind of clean, pure sustenance I need that is safe for me to drink. So when we look at this imagery, here it's interesting that David, who of course remember is also a king, uses language that sometimes kings would use to describe how they lead their flock. In fact, there was another king about 700 years before then who wrote down, he said, I help my people find rest in green pastures. What he was saying is, I provide for my people. And here David, as a king, is saying the ultimate true king, God, finds these pastures for me. He provides everything that I need. He provides all of the protection that I need. And if I trust him, and if I believe that he is in control, then I can find rest and I can lie down.